I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker today, Matt Chmura. He's a proud Yale School of Management alumnus and also an esteemed member of our YCCI Board of Advisors. Matt currently serves as the Chief Marketing, Communications, and Brand Officer at the LPGA, where he oversees the league's marketing, strategy, and execution with a keen focus on attracting and engaging fans. His consumer-centric approach has been instrumental in driving this period of growth for the league. Before joining the LPGA, Matt held the position of Vice President of Marketing and Communications with the Boston Bruins, where he earned the honor of having his name engraved on the iconic Stanley Cup trophy. Almost certainly our only speaker today to hold that distinction. Today, Matt's going to share a couple of insights with us into how the LPGA leverages its first-party data to inform its upcoming rebranding efforts and drive audience growth for the league. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Matt Chmura.
Thanks. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, so I think we'll start a little bit first with just level setting kind of about the LPGA. We are certainly experiencing a moment for women's professional sports and their role in the entertainment landscape, both in this country and globally. The LPGA holds the distinction of being the oldest women's professional league in the world. We turn 75 next year, and this year our athletes will compete for right around $130 million on the golf course, and then off the golf course earn more than triple that. But I think what's important to understand, especially me coming from the men's sports environment primarily, is kind of what has been holding women's sports growth back for a long time. And I think that's a critical piece. And it starts with the investment into women's professional sports by the league and kind of where we were going. So I had actually pivoted outside of sports after the Bruins was kind of done with that chapter of my career. And then when it came to coming back to sports, what drew me in was realizing that in my world, the world that I like to build and oversee, the LPGA and women's sports in general, as I did a lot of research, was almost at zero, right? And so for so long, women's sports had just thought about, hey, how do we create money for our athletes to compete? And that was it, right? So it was thinking about hospitality plays. It was thinking about just like earning enough, scratching enough money together to allow athletes to compete to earn a living. And that's fine, right? But then when you think about the business of sports entertainment and how you grow, you can't be a viable commercial entity the same way men's sports are by behaving that way. So what I'm going to do today is talk a little bit where our journey is over the last 2 years and where we're going by leveraging data and fan data to become much more viable to create more money. A couple other facts about the LPGA. We are a nonprofit organization. We don't have an owner. So all the money that we create, all the value that we create goes back to our athletes. So truly a mission-driven organization to give our athletes a chance to compete and play on a level playing field as the men. We have offices in Seoul, London, and our headquarters are in Central Florida. And we're broadcast in over 200 countries globally. So it is difficult to understand how you can be a truly global brand that's trying to attract revenue from around the world when you're not investing in marketing. So the problem when I came here was we hadn't invested in marketing, true marketing. We had zero fan data collection or insights. And basically, we're putting on golf tournaments, we're putting them on TV, and away we go. The focus was entirely on the stability of the business for the athletes and the purses that they're playing for, right? So what is our desired output? Like, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to do with fan data, et cetera? So first-party data for us, it drives a relationship with fans on an individual level. When you come from the men's sports side, like in the early 2000s, we're thinking about fans on a person-to-person individual level. Thinking about how do you market to different individuals, how do you market to different segments, how do you create individual relationships with fans, with consumers on how they're going to consume your product, how they're going to engage with your building, other events that are happening at your building, et cetera. First-party data to drive event attendance for us. Event attendance had never been a priority for the LPGA, which is kind of strange to think about in the sports and entertainment industry, but when you think about the business model, it is a cost center to market to fans and to build out the infrastructure at an event to get fans there, right? So it was all like that wasn't something that was important. But then you get on this hamster wheel where if you don't have enough fans at your venues and you don't have enough people engaging with your product, right, like then your value is held low. Digital engagement, obviously, with our digital products, our social channels, and our website, but also certainly through our individual athletes, their digital properties and their digital spaces. Broadcast support and sponsorship partner opportunities, providing partners an opportunity to invest in us as a commercial vehicle rather to help reach their consumers the way traditional men's sports do. Again, like our product was sold largely as a D&I and hospitality play for partners, for companies to invest in us. It wasn't seen as, on the men's side, when you're a sports brand and you're meeting with a potential B2B partner sponsor, you're thinking about, hey, how can they use your brand to help reach their potential consumers, right? How can you introduce new consumers to their brand, raise brand awareness, et cetera? We didn't have that ability to do that. That's where we're trying to go, and that's what we're trying to use first-party data to do. So what are our initial steps? Like, think about starting from zero, and maybe there's people in this room who are thinking about, hey, how do you start from zero on a first-party data level? First, for us, being a sports property, like we relied heavily on our broadcast partners, NBC, CBS, Golf Channel, right? And you rely on, hey, who's watching your product? Who's consuming your product? What does their data show, right? Which is great, but that doesn't give us any concrete data, right? Like that just gives us a look as to what the demographics look like that Nielsen's telling them, et cetera. Fan surveying, the event attendees that are there, the digital describers to newsletters, et cetera. Like how do you look at them and glean some level of insight from where they are? And then we partnered with two companies. One, W5, which is based in Manhattan. They're a sports insights company on fans. And they did a fan segmentation study for us. And you know, we'll get to my feelings on fan segmentation later, but this is an important first step, right? Because we don't have that fan data to sort through. We don't have that consumer data to sort through to say, hey, like, who are our fans? Let's dig into the demographics of what those are. So we had to start somewhere. So we went to the fan segmentation study, and then Sports Innovation Lab, which is a group also out of Manhattan, is a group that can pair consumer purchasing history and preferences on similar products and try to match up and help guide you along with a fan segmentation study to say, hey, here are fan segments that you can lean into. So what are those segments? For us, there were 5 key segments that were kind of identified that were places where we could grow into, right? And there was obviously more, but these are the 5 key ones. So the core enthusiast, which is, you know, like to put it broadly, and I'll go over broad strokes of all of these. To put it broadly, like that core enthusiast for us was like your 30 to 45-year-old executive, young executive, probably a girl dad or definitely a dad who loves sports. Sports are an essential part of his life. But now he's thinking about, hey, how does sports fit into his life and how does sports fit into his family's life, et cetera. Your engaged spectator, this is somebody who loves sports, maybe skews a little bit older, in the 40 to 50 range. He's engaged with sports that are in his world, probably a member of a country club, et cetera. You know, and sports are an essential part of what he does when he's not in the office. The woman sports supporter, which is obviously a big segment for us. Like this is someone who probably isn't a golf fan, isn't a fan of what we're doing, but wants to support women athletes, female athletes. Then there's the general golfer. And for us, the general golfer is obviously the person who his whole or her whole life revolves around golfing. And like that's a big part of who they are. And then there's the engaged sports fan. And like that engaged sports fan is the person that just, whatever big sporting event is on at the moment, at the time, like that's what they're tuned into. So from there, obviously that's a big group for us to try to attack, you know, given our size and our scope and where we're coming from. So we prioritize these 3 segments beneath: the women's sports supporter, the core enthusiast, and the engaged spectator. And why we did that is we felt like we had the best opportunity to grow our fan base by engaging with these groups. Obviously, the general golfer had a bigger percentage of people that they felt that our groups felt like we could attack, but to them, right now, at this moment in time, we're probably the second best product, right? And so we thought about it as, hey, how do we say, okay, yes, you're a general golfer and you're a big golf fan and golf's a central part of your life, but if we're gonna be the second best product behind the men to you, like that's gonna be a harder position for us to move off of, right? So we go into this and we think these three are the segments that we can really attack. These three are the segments that we felt like we could lean into the most and try to attract. So how do we do that? And I think this is a key piece for us, is that content and engagement strategy and communication strategy to each individual and to those potential fans are very different. And I think that it's an important piece for people to think about no matter what their product is, right? Content and engagement, like we feel like, is the content that we can create that people are gonna want to engage in. This isn't pushing our message. This isn't trying to jam sales down your throat. This is just, hey, how do you think about creating things that are gonna bring and delivering them to people via the channels that they follow? And how are you going to engage that new audience and provide something compelling that makes them wanna partner with you and that makes them want to come into your world? And then the communications plan is different, right? Like that's the next step. Okay, you have people interested. You've gotten people to click on your link. You've got them to follow your social channels. You got them to go to your website, right? Like how do you then take that, and because you have them engaged through your content, and then how do you go and how do you create unique communications for them as individuals and try to bring them more into your universe and create that two-way communication with them? And I think that's a critical piece that we think about every day, as how content engagement is different than communications. Very, very different. The next piece is investment. And this is another key piece to where we're going, and is the next step for us after you dive into who your fans are and what fans you're trying to attract. And for us, there's the content strategy and creation piece, which we've invested in heavily. What is that content? How many people do you have doing the content? Do you have a different content strategy for every social channel? Do you have a different content strategy for every email group and every email segment that goes out? I think it's really, really important when you think about content. And obviously sports are a little bit different because we are essentially content companies, and we have, a lot of companies would kill for the amount of content that we have, 10 hours on a golf course, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then athletes who are doing and living their own lives every day outside of that. So we have more content than we could ever distribute, right? But I think what a brand or what anybody who's creating content, like one of the worst mistakes they can make is kind of create it and drop it, right? And like not have a strategy for every single channel, not understand the users on the different channels, not understand how X Twitter is different than Instagram, is different than Facebook, is different than your website, is different than TikTok, right? And so how are you thinking about each one of those social channels? How are you then understanding the users of those social channels? How do you then pair that back to your fan segments that you're trying to hit, or your consumer segments that you're trying to hit? And then how do you have a content strategy that's unique for every single one of those? And I see so many, whether sports entertainment brands, consumer brands, et cetera, that you can just tell when you look at their channels and you look at at what they're doing digitally and socially, that they just have a create it and drop it strategy, right? And they're not thinking about the users of each one of those channels, how they're different and how they need to pay attention specifically and learn about who's on each one of those channels. Like it may sound a little elementary, but the amount of brands that screw this up is significant, right? So I would urge you to really think about, and I understand like there's investment into this, but there needs to be a strategy for every single channel that's based on the users that are there. You're not gonna be able to convince the users who are on that channel to switch their preference. You have to adapt to them and create content that's compelling to them. Data infrastructure, I think this is another big piece for us. Like as I mentioned, we didn't spend the LPGA and talking to people in the female sports world and other leagues and teams, they haven't spent on this. Like they haven't spent on the tools that are necessary to, once you get that fan data and once you harvest it and you have the first party data, how are you using it? How are you thinking about it? How is your BI team or your tech team able to dig into the data and to manipulate it in ways that can be valuable for both you and your partners? A critical piece for us. New website and app. For us, again, kind of where women's sports are and where female sports are in that investment, our website and app was built in 2014. And there has not been significant investment into the website and app year over year from that. In the sports and entertainment world, to give you an idea of what that looks like, we believe, and the data in the sports and entertainment world suggests that you should be spending about a third to a half of what you spent when you create your website year over year, optimizing your website to harvest more data with single sign-on capabilities, et cetera, to convince people so one, they get to your site, and when you see some of the data that we were talking about earlier, as far as where people are going on your site, what pages they're going to, what they're adding to their cart, if we're talking about shopping, as we have as well. But not only that, but understand who that person is, why they're making those consumer decisions, and investing in the back-end tech of your website and app is a critical piece to that you can leverage over and over again. I think more and more people are compelled to sign in, create relationships with brands that they admire, that they follow, that they engage with. So creating a value proposition for them to create an account with you, to sign into your website, to sign into your mobile app, et cetera, and then following their journey on an individual level is critical. I think today's modern consumer, the more and more you can create individual relationships with them and interact with them on a more personal basis is critical to getting them to move. I think a lot of brands obviously are thinking about share of wallet. We're thinking about share of time and share of wallet, right? So following sports is hard. It's a commitment, whether you're going to the golf course, whether you're giving us time on our digital products, whether you're watching the broadcast. So we're thinking about how do you attack share of wallet and share of time. And by having that individual user data on your digital properties, like you're able to do that. And then lastly, as we talked about earlier, global rebrand. And for us, this is a critical piece to how we're thinking about moving forward. Our athletes, we like to think of as athletes, spent a lot of time, and like anybody who's a marketer, right? Like you need to know your product inside and out. And so a lot of my time early at the LPGA was thinking about, hey, who are our athletes? Like really digging into them at their core and understanding who they are so that through all the things we're talking about earlier, we can best represent them back to the general public and to the consumers. And for us, we're not doing that right now, right? And branding for us was thought of as a logo. It was thought of as, hey, this is, old school marketing tactics. Like we have a logo, we have colors, we have fonts, and then there's a brand police. But that's not modern marketing, right? Like marketing ties into the things we're talking about earlier. It's how do you behave, right? Like how is your product showcased? How do you create that connection that's compelling back to your consumers that properly identifies what your product is? And it's every way your brand behaves through your social, your digital, your email communication, et cetera. And so for us, having athletes who basically are working at their craft, 10 to 12 hours a day in the gym early, then on the golf course, then back to the gym, then physio, and thinking about what they're eating, all of those things, in talking to our athletes, like they want to be perceived as the badass athletes that they are, right? Like they don't want to be perceived as, oh, the women who play golf, right? Like that is the last thing they want. And I think that is an area that all women's sports are trying to lean into right now, right? And this awakening to the fact that the female athletes that are competing in any sport are just as badass as the men, right? And they're working just as hard as the men. And like that is such an important piece, I think, to this awakening. When you think of Caitlin Clark or you think of Serena Williams, like you don't think of like, oh, that woman who plays a sport, right? Like you think of a badass athlete. But I think in large part, the female sports leagues have failed the athletes in this piece. And that's where we all need to change. And that's what we're looking to lean into. But as you want to showcase your product and as you want to lean into this piece, you want to do it and you want to do it in a way that matches how you can sell to partners, how you can sell and create value for companies that want to partner with you, and how you can engage in fans. So leaning on that fan data that we're starting to collect and leaning on who our product is and who our product wants to be and kind of matching those up and pairing those up is largely where we're going with our rebrand for 25 as we enter our 75th year. So when we think about 25 and beyond and where we're going, I think fan data is really a key driver of our business. It's not only with our rebrand, right? But it's thinking about, hey, how do we look at where our brand is, where we want to go, and where our consumers want to be, and making business decisions not just about marketing, but about everything that we do based on that fan data. So whether that's where we play events, right? Like, so largely for us, where our events have been played has been based almost solely on where a partner is, maybe our geographical flow of our schedule, where TV wants us based on TV times, right? But it hasn't thought about where the consumer is. Again, I think this is a challenge that maybe like a traditional, what we call stick and ball sport, like doesn't have, right? Like, so they're playing at their home venues. They're thinking about, hey, where are we? Where are we this week? We're away for 2 games, but then we come home, right? And so they have a geographical region that they're marketing to and thinking about. For us, leveraging that fan data, understanding who's buying tickets, where are they buying tickets, who's watching, like how often are they watching? These are all critical pieces for us that we need to start taking into day in, day out. I think another big piece of that fan data and where we can go with it, regarding our business is international, and that's another big part of where we are. Right now, we play 7 events in Asia a year, we play 4 events in Europe, the rest are in the US and Canada, and we have to think about where the fans are engaging with our athletes the most, where is that content being engaged with, where are the purchasing decisions being made, and making sure that we're tailoring our schedule around where our fans are. Broadcast is a big piece for us as well, right? So in a traditional sports and entertainment world, we think of broadcast, and that accounts for generally like 60-70% of your year-over-year revenue. That's changing. That's changing in a fast way. I think when we think about network TV, rights fees, and professional sports entertainment landscape, that is going to be decreasing moving forward. And when you think about more and more sports properties partnering with streaming companies and how they're streaming and how they're delivering their product, that's changing. And we first see a more D2C model moving forward, right? And again, to do that, we lean back on that fan data, right? And if you have a D2C product, the most important piece is that first-party fan data or first-party consumer data. And how are you marketing directly to those consumers? How are you expanding the time that they spend with your product? And how are you expanding share of wallet? So for us, that D2C piece is a critical part of our future moving forward. The personalized relationship with the fans, based on that fan data, again, I think as a consumer, based on our research, the expectation from the modern consumer, especially in the sports and entertainment landscape, is to be marketed to individually. And it's not to be blanket marketed. And I think that is something that a lot of brands don't pay attention to and expect. And you can see that the brands in our industry who do it well, everything that you see, the consumer feels like they have a personal relationship with the brand. They are emotionally invested. They feel like the brand is emotionally invested back in them, and they feel like it's part of who they are. And so for us, creating that personal relationship with the fans based on that fan data is really critical. And then lastly, for me, segmentation studies, and I think, which is ironic given where we had to start in this journey, is that segmentation studies in the modern space, I think, are not effective, right? Like they're effective in helping you start the journey, but they're not effective in helping you finish the journey, right? Like now, if I'm talking to my commissioner, CEO, however you want to title her, you're thinking about, hey, how can we take the first party data and not have to think about things on broad strokes and kind of hit and hope, as we would say in golf, right? Like how can we actually make informed decisions that are rooted in facts from our own data? And while segmentation studies can help you at the start, if you rely on those singularly and absent of that first party data, I think you're missing the mark. And I think that you have so many more tools that you can invest in that while the segmentation piece is important, it can't be your be-all, end-all. And so I guess, and start taking questions because I'm more of an interactive person, but I think for me, this journey is really hopeful, I hope, for either brands who are trying to reinvent themselves or brands that haven't paid as much attention to the digital space and the data space moving forward. Because as we think about it, the changing landscape, the changed landscape, and like getting to equity for our athletes really hinges on the first party data, how we can use content, how we can use content strategy, how we can use communication strategy to both harvest the first-party data and then use it to our advantage to create those individualized personal relationships. So that's where we are. I'd love to take some questions and engage a little bit and kind of go from there.
Hi.
Hey.
Very interesting. I'm a bit of a sports marketing geek myself.
I love it.
And I have I'd like to get your response to some very specific things that are out there. Number one, can you create a Caitlin Clark?
Can you create a Caitlin Clark?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not.
So you can't do what the WNBA has done.
Well, let me answer that question this way. If you go back 4 or 5 years, the NCAA and ESPN, ABC made a decision, right? They made a decision that prior to 4 or 5 years ago, if you watched women's basketball, first, you probably couldn't watch women's basketball. It'd be very difficult to find. Number two, if you did find it, it was at third or fourth class venues, right? And it was broadcast in a substandard way compared to the men, right? And 4 or 5 years ago, the NCAA, ESPN, and CBS got together and they decided to change that. And they developed a strategy to change how they showcase their athletes, right? And so they started playing at better venues. They started playing in TV windows that made sense, and they started putting them on TV. And most importantly, they started investing into the production so that it looked the same as the men, whether that was cameras, number of cameras, angles of cameras, the technology that goes into a broadcast, graphics packages, et cetera, to make the product look the same, right? And so they made that investment, and they decided to do that 4 or 5 years ago. So then when Caitlin Clark came around, they were prepared to capitalize on that strategy, right? And I think like that is a key piece. So I don't think you can create a Caitlin Clark, but you can create the infrastructure and invest in the infrastructure to showcase an athlete of that magnitude when they're there. Like to give you an example for us, like in an average week, both being on Golf Channel or NBC, the men's tour has about 4x the amount of cameras that we have, right? So what does that mean? That means the jump cuts from athlete to athlete are significantly higher. They're showing more players week over week. The quality of the cameras is better, so the images look crisper, right? And with that comes what? It comes more viewers, which is obviously helpful, but it's also more time to showcase the athletes. So for the athletes who are monetizing themselves, sleeves, shirt, hat, golf bag, et cetera, with brands, now you're getting the chance to show more athletes, which is upping their value. Also of note, for us, our ratings jump on average 4x when we're on network TV versus Golf Channel, right? And I would assume it's the same with women's basketball. So when you start putting women's basketball on network versus on cable, like you see that jump in popularity. And like that certainly means more revenue for the leagues, which is great, but it also means more opportunity for fans to engage your product, right? And fans to watch. So long-winded way to answer about Caitlin Clark, to say you can't create it, but you can fight for and build the infrastructure to capitalize on an athlete that has that generational greatness and kind of attract more people to your game and to your product.
Well, related to that, is the fact that it seems that certain leagues have made the decision to highlight individuals as opposed to the sport generally, right? NBA, MLB, and so forth. Netflix has this series called Full Swing.
Yes.
That shows the behind-the-scenes life of professional golfers.
Yes.
Can you do that? Why and why not?
Yeah.
What's standing in the way of doing, your own version of that?
$1.5 million an episode. No, but I mean, listen, it is something that we want to lean into. I think though you bring up an important point, right? An important point that I want to make is that stuff is important. In some ways, that's a way that women's sports have missed the mark. And I would advise everybody in here to think about their product and how you can miss the mark. The flashy stuff, that great stuff is awesome. if you don't have this stuff done, the infrastructure that we talked about here, if you don't have the right tools in your digital products, if you don't have a strategy to capitalize on that first, and you can't create those relationships with the fans that you attract and bring in, then is it for naught? You know, and that's an important point, I think, that like the flashy stuff that may be attractive to a CEO, right? That may be attractive to an advisor. That's great, like, you know, and like there's this place for that, but only if you've done the work on the back end. And I think in the history of women's sports, like the investment has been made into that stuff and not to the back end stuff that's critically important. I mean, the tools that, when I got to the LPGA in 2022, the tools that we had as a women's sports league were similar to the tools that I had at the Boston Bruins in 2007, 2008, right? Like, so think about that. Like, if you don't invest in that stuff, that's not as sexy, that's not as great. Like, if you're not investing into those things, then you'll never be able to capitalize to the full potential of your product.
I have a question.
Yep.
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation on women's sports, firstly. Would you elaborate more on the segmentation studies that you could not rely on? Coming from a perspective, we are managing data and analytics and we are investing heavily on customer segmentation. What failed in, was it a failure? Or is it because of an underlying data issue, not reliable data? What was it that was not fruitful or, you know, insightful to rely on for making informed decisions?
Yeah, sorry if I confused you a little bit there. I would highly advise it with your first-party data and to dig into it with your first-party data. I think when you're relying on third-party data to do your fan segmentation studies like we had to do because we didn't have that investment into first-party data and it hadn't been a priority, then I think while there's value to it at a certain point in your journey, like you'd rather use it, you'd rather the first-party data. And I guess that's where I'm arguing my point, or arguing the point is a little bit, is that the third-party segmentation studies, they're great from a high-level perspective, but to truly dig into the behavior of your actual consumers, like it has to be first-party, right? Like it has to be. It can't, relying on that outside piece for me, like doesn't give you a true indication of how somebody's interacting with your brands. How are they consuming your content? How can you grow the pie for us in share of time and share of wallet, right? And like that's got to come from the first-party piece, not from segmentation studies that are based in third-party data.
Thank you.